So, and you had a really successful career in the public life. Would you say is the one thing that you are most grateful for to have achieved?
Well, there are two things. I mean, on the big sort of wide scale, I'm delighted to have played the part I did in finally bringing Brexit to fruition. But when people ask me about Westminster, they always think I'm going to point to some law that I made or something like that. And yes, those things are important. But what really stands out from my Westminster years was an occasion when I got one of my constituents out of jail in Morocco, by which I mean I got him released. I didn't spring him from jail in Morocco. But by the time his wife came to see me, he'd been convicted, he'd been sentenced, and he'd lost his appeal. And I thought, well, what am I supposed to be doing about this? You know, I can't intervene in the system of justice in this country, never mind in somebody else's. But anyway, to cut a very long story short, the moment did come when I'd been out to Rabat and I'd seen the King's Counsellor, the Interior Minister, the Justice Minister. The time did come when I was able to phone up his wife and say, and he was supposed to be serving 9 years, I was able to say, John's out, he's with the ambassador, he'll be home in a fortnight, by which time he hadn't even been there 18 months. And her reaction, when she finally realised what I was telling her, told me why it was that I'd become an MP. And I think the sad thing is this, on both sides of the House of Commons and in all parties, big parties and very small parties, most MPs can point to such moments when, because they were where they were and did what they did, however odd it might seem to other people, they didn't make a drop of difference to the nation, they didn't make a trickle of difference to their constituency, but they made a tidal wave of difference to an individual family. And it's those moments which I've carried away with me from Westminster.
Awesome. What does it mean to you to have such a positive impact in families' life, in human life?
Well, obviously, as Christians, we're supposed to help our neighbours. You know, I mean, the Good Samaritan had a pretty big impact on the man who'd fallen among thieves, and we're supposed to help where help is sought. And one can't always, I mean, I haven't had 100% success rate or anything near it in dealing with other people's problems. But when you can sort one, and when you can sort a big one like that, and one that at the very beginning you think, no chance, you know, no chance, I'll do what I can, but no chance, this isn't going to work. And then it does work, that is a wonderful feeling.
Awesome. And you've had a lifetime in public life. Who would you say are the people who inspired you?
I think, well, two people who were in, one was in politics long before I was born. One was in politics when I was fairly young. The first was Wilberforce and the second was Winston Churchill. And in fact, they've got something in common, because we all know, everybody knows, you know, Wilberforce finally managed to abolish slavery. But it wasn't done like that overnight. He didn't come along and say to Parliament, you've got it all wrong, and everybody suddenly agreed. It was a long time with a lot of setbacks along the way. It took about 40 years to abolish slavery and all. And the same thing goes for Winston Churchill. He had huge setbacks. There was Dunkirk. Then we didn't win a battle for 2 years, other than the Battle of Britain. We didn't win a land battle at all. But he kept going, and he kept going, and he wasn't discouraged, and he didn't give up. And I said that during the Brexit campaign. And for that matter, during the big pro-life campaigns of the 80s and early 90s. I was saying, look, doesn't matter how many setbacks we have, just keep going. And of course, Nigel Farage has done exactly that. It's taken him 25 years to get from going into the European Parliament to split us from the EU and actually getting Britain to agree that that was what was to be done. People who are resolute, in the end, achieve.
Awesome. So with a woman who have reached the height that you have reached, would you say that's the character that you've adopted, resilience?
Yeah, resolution, determination, whatever you want to call it. It is saying, this is what I want to do. This is what I believe it is right to do, and I'm going to try my level best to do this. I may succeed, as we did with Brexit. I may fail, as we did with some of the pro-life campaigns. But whatever happens, I'm going to do the thing that I believe is right. And that's what I've always been guided by. People say to me, in party leadership elections, I always seem to back the person who doesn't win. And I say yes, because I back the person I want to win, not the person I necessarily think will, but the person I want to win. And that's been the way that I've conducted my life.
Awesome. You talked about backing what is truth.
Yes.
As a committed Christian and a former leading member of the government, would you say on occasions it was difficult to compromise your faith?
It is less difficult than one might think in Parliament, certainly in the British Parliament. It does vary across the world, because we do have the concept of the free vote. That is when the party doesn't tell you which way to vote, it tells you can do what you like because this is a conscience issue. And that would apply to things like, say, capital punishment, abortion, homosexual law, divorce law. It would apply, hunting even, it would apply to those sorts of things. And therefore, if you intensely believe that something is right and you want to vote that way, then certainly in Britain and certainly in the Conservative Party in Parliament, there was usually the free vote at that point. So it isn't always the case that you have a big conflict between your conscience and what the party wants you to do. The bigger challenge is saying what is the inspiration for where you're standing. God is very rarely mentioned in Parliament these days, very rarely indeed. In fact, I think the last time that I could find was when Enoch Powell talked about God, when many years ago now, going back to the 70s or the early 80s, when he was talking about the then embryology bill, and he invoked the scriptures. And when I was asked to choose a speech from the past, for one of those collections, that people do from time to time, they said, would I find a speech from the past? I went straight to Powell's speech because it was the last time, as far as I know, that God was mentioned. I think Ian Paisley may have occasionally done that, but it is not the norm for mainstream politicians. It really isn't. And I think that is the bigger challenge, to be able to say, I'm doing this, as Wilberforce did over slavery. I'm doing this because I actually think it is consistent with the Word of God.
Awesome. You said that God is not often mentioned in the government. Very rarely. Why do you think?
Oh, people are now embarrassed. I mean, there was a time when it would have been perfectly normal to talk about your religion in the House of Commons. It was a big debate in society. Religion was a debate, Catholicism versus Protestantism. These things were discussed. They were part of the normal conversation. But I get, or used to get, umpteen letters from people saying, you shouldn't talk about your faith so much because faith is a private matter. And I used to write back and say, well, St. Paul said, we believe and therefore speak. But actually, Christ told us not to hide our light under a bushel. And my enemies have accused me of many things in my political lifetime, never yet of hiding my light under a bushel.
Well, so I've understood that you've left Church of England and you joined Catholic. Was that a difficult decision to make?
It was a very difficult decision emotionally. It wasn't difficult intellectually. It was very difficult emotionally because I came from a family of Anglicans, and I do mean deep practicing Anglicans, not just who happen to go to church on a Sunday. We were very practicing. My uncle was a vicar, my brother was a vicar, my younger nephew is a vicar. So, in fact, sometimes I used to say that the purpose of the Widdecombe family was to breed vicars for the Church of England. We had so many. So my Anglicanism was very deep-rooted, and it was very connected with family and all the rest of it. So when the time came, when I decided I was going to become a Catholic, it was quite difficult. But I said at the time, I wasn't jumping across some great abyss between the two. I was crossing a bridge between the two. But of course, when you do cross a bridge, you've always got your back to one side. And that was the sadness. And I was sad, but at the same time, I was utterly convinced I had no choice. I couldn't see that the Church of England any longer was guided by major principle. It was always sacrificing faith to fashion, creed to compromise. It never filled its pews that way, but it went on doing that. And interestingly, the only growing part of the Church of England is its evangelical wing, which of course does not compromise and just says it as it is. And I wanted to feel that I was part of a church that knew what it stood for, that wasn't going to be swayed by popularity, that was simply going to say, this is truth, that's falsehood, this is right, that's wrong. That's what I want.
Awesome. I've read that from having this conversation with you, I've understand that you left because of they being swayed from what was before, the foundation. But I've read that you said, well, basically it's implied that you left because of women being being ordained. Why?
That's quite true. That was the last straw in a very large bundle of straw. Now, people often say to me, if the Church of England hadn't ordained women, would I ever have become a Catholic? And the answer is yes, but probably much later. I was already tired of, as I say, the Church of England's compromises. I mean, we had a fourth most senior bishop in the Church of England, the fourth most senior, the then Bishop of Durham, questioning articles of creed, and he remained a bishop. And the Catholic Church, if any curate did that, he'd be out. Never mind a bishop. I just thought, well, if the bishops aren't prepared to preach the creed, who is? That was just one of many, many instances. So I had, as I say, this very large bundle of straw. The final straw on that bundle was when the Church of England decided to ordain women. It didn't debate the theology of it. If you look at the synod debate, led by the Archbishop of Canterbury himself, it was all about how if we didn't do this, we wouldn't appeal to the modern world. Now, that is not the way to decide anything in the church. You do not follow the world, you lead the world. So I just said, that's it, that is the final straw. Most people think I then became a Catholic overnight, but I didn't, in fact. I spent 4 months in no communion whatever, trying to work out if I was going to become a Catholic, because I had certain doctrinal things to resolve. And in the Catholic Church, when you're received, you have to say aloud, I believe that all the church teaches is revealed truth. All the church teaches, not this bit and that bit. All is revealed truth. If you can't say that, then you would either commit a major act of perjury or you wouldn't be received. So it took several months before I managed to reconcile those sorts of difficulties.
Okay. So I'm understanding that it wasn't because the woman was taking a decision-making role in the church.
There are two basic reasons. I'm going to reduce this to simplicity because I'm sure you understand whole books have been written on this subject, so it's got to be reduced to simplicity. First of all, there was the apostolic succession. Now, there's every evidence that Christ valued women highly. I mean, think about it. His first miracle was at the request of a woman. The first witnesses to his resurrection were the women at the tomb. So there's a load of evidence that he valued women highly, and yet he did not appoint a single woman apostle, not one. And that to me says very clearly that the apostolic succession has to be maintained as Christ ordained it. Secondly, of course, and this is where the theology comes in, the woman stands in the person of Christ at the consecration, or the priest does. Now, if you say a woman can do that, then a man can stand in the person of the Virgin Mary. I find extremely unfair.
Okay. So you saying, because I've been to a lot of churches where women are the heads of the churches, are you saying we are in wrong alignment?
Yes.
We are?
I'm saying that it is not theologically possible for a woman to be a priest. That is my position. That is why I have joined a church, which that is its line. And I could have stayed in the Church of England and fought, as a lot of people asked me to do, and I said no. Church of England has taken that decision. In Church of England terms, it's a valid decision. I can't stay, but I'm not going to stay and be awkward. I'm just going. And I did. And if people ask me bluntly, do I believe that women can be priests, I'm still going to say no. And you asked me. So you got the answer, I'm afraid, that I think you knew was coming.
Thank you. Study has shown that more and more people are leaving the Christian faith.
Yeah.
Do you think that we should still refer to ourselves as a Christian country?
Yes, I do think we should refer to ourselves as a Christian country, although I'm the first to admit it's now something we're saying with our last gasp. I think we are a Christian country in as much as, for a start, we have an established church. Now, a lot of people say to me they think the church should be disestablished, and I, who left it, say no. Because if it is, then there is not the slightest reason for the state to insist on religious education in schools. Our big ceremonies of state, like the coronation, for example, won't be Christian-based. You wouldn't be saying that the king or the queen holds their throne by the grace of God. You wouldn't be saying that anymore. And it just, I think it would be the death knell of Christianity. So we have an established church. Our big ceremonies, as I've just said, are still based on the concept, that people hold their positions by the grace of God. The House of Commons still has Christian prayers every day. Very few people attend, but they happen every day before the debates begin. Perhaps in the chamber, the Speaker takes prayers. So I do think we can call ourselves a Christian country. What I don't think we can say is that we're a country where the majority are Christians, because patently, obviously, they're not. And that is the fault of Christians. And people often say to me, well, what should Parliament do about it? And I say nothing at all. It's the fault of Christians. It's down to us. If the early church had as much enthusiasm as we have for spreading the word of God, we'd all still be worshipping Zeus. And it's down to us. We're the people with the good news. We're the people who are supposed to spread the word. Don't look to somebody else to do it.
So you're saying that Parliament cannot play a role in helping the church?
Well, Parliament clearly does, because it's an established church, and therefore Parliament votes on a lot of church matters. It had to, for example, it had to vote on women priests. Believe it or not, that had to come before Parliament itself. So Parliament does have a lot to do with the church constitutionally. But that's a very different matter from spreading Christ's message. I don't think Parliament does that. Individual members of Parliament might, but I don't think Parliament as a whole does. And as I say, it's down to Christians. It's, if Christians are always shrinking back, and the number of people who say to me on an almost daily basis, oh, but you can't say that these days. And I say, yes, you jolly well can. If you believe it, we believe, and therefore speak. Get on with it. But that's easy for me to say. All my life, I've been in a position where I could say what I liked. And it might make me unpopular, but it wasn't going to cost me my job. And I could say what I liked in Parliament. People who are not in that happy position, who really can lose jobs these days for saying the wrong thing, for saying something as innocent as God bless you, or whatever it might be, I understand why they're reticent. But it's because they're reticent that Christianity ain't growing.
And you say it's because of the fault of the Christians.
I'm saying it's the job of Christians to spread the message. The job of Christians, as it was the job of the early church. It's not the job of Parliament.
Yeah, I do understand it's not the job of Parliament, but my question was, what can Parliament do to aid that? But in other words, you're saying that...
Parliament, for example, could, and I always hope that it will eventually get round to it, pass laws to protect freedom of speech. A lot of Christians are very afraid to say what they believe, particularly in the workplace, not exclusively, but particularly in the workplace. And if it was made unlawful for them to lose their jobs, it would be a much better situation.
With all the problem that COVID has caused and the fear that has gripped the people of Great Britain, do you say that it gives the church an opportunity to bring back Christianity to the forefront?
Well, it's an opportunity the church hasn't taken up. I mean, the church has been positively timid throughout this. I mean, first of all, we were told the churches had to close. Why? Then we were told, you couldn't take the communion. Apparently, you were going to, if you're a Catholic, you were going to get the plague from the real presence. Then we're told you can't handle Bibles, and no, you're going to get plague from the Word of God, and so on and so forth. And the church just sat there, and the church just took it all. And what has the church done about spreading a message of hope? Individual vicars have. There was one wonderful one, vicar of the Church of England, wonderful chap, who went out into the streets with a megaphone and played Abide With Me, I think it was, but he played something. And cameras panned, and they showed initially the people sort of looking vaguely out of their windows, but they weren't doing much. This was in lockdown. And then one or two came out and stood by their doors to listen. And then eventually, at the end of it all, a whole street full almost of people were standing out by their doors listening. And when the vicar went off to the next street, they all did this. Now that was the word of God in action, and I wish that vicar were the Archbishop of Canterbury.
You said that being told by government not to do certain things, you said that we sat down and we didn't do anything about it as a church.
Didn't even protest. I mean, let's take a very obvious example. Churches were closed even for private prayer. Now, there is nowhere easier than a church to keep social distance for private prayer. You at this end of the pew, the other person at that end of the pew. Miss out a pew, and then you get two more. And the fact is that people don't mass in church for private prayer. They go in drips and drabs. We should have resisted. We should have said to government, look, hang on. We'll guarantee the social distance as long as you allow us to open for private prayer. We didn't do that. Now, I was very blessed. Catholic Church was live streaming. Some Anglican churches were live streaming. I could get a live stream. And the church could be brought into our homes. But we couldn't go to the church. And I understand why they didn't want people standing side by side in absolutely crammed churches. Oh, wouldn't I like to think all the churches in this country were crammed in absolutely crammed churches. But couldn't open it up for private prayer. Couldn't open it up, a huge place like Westminster Cathedral, for a socially distanced mass. Couldn't do that. Really couldn't do that. Of course they could have done that, and they should have resisted.
Awesome. You have also campaigned tirelessly for the UK to leave the EU.
Rather, we've gone.
Why do you think that was the best decision? Why?
Because I believe that we are a sovereign state, we should be free to make our own laws. Now, I was a minister in Her Majesty's government for nearly 7 years. And it was during that time that I realised how completely helpless we were when it came to running our own affairs. Every single sub-paragraph of every single act or law or bill had to be proofed against European law. If we wanted to do something and European law said no, we couldn't do it. If we didn't want to do something but European law said you must, we had to do it. And I just said, this is a farce. We might as well be a county council. We're not a government. We're not actually in charge of our own affairs. So I believed very strongly that Britain should be free to run her own affairs, as I believe that every country should be free to do that. If I didn't believe that, I'd still believe in empire, and I don't. I believe that countries should be free to run themselves.
Awesome. And how do you think we are coping with COVID, Brexit?
Well, of course, the coincidence of COVID and Brexit has been very challenging. There's no doubt about that, Angry as I am with Boris Johnson for some of the things he's done, I do understand that there's hardly a worse situation than we have the most important international negotiations for 50 years going on as we've got the biggest emergency in the country for 50 years. So I understand entirely that he's found it difficult. I think we've been very, very illogical over COVID. We've known from a very early stage that 9 out of 10 people who died have had other underlying health conditions. And that was a figure before government was even including obesity as a health condition. So a lot of people who died who were obese were being classed as having no underlying health condition. 9 out of 10. And 4 out of 5 people who get it, so we're told by the scientists, either won't even know they've got it or will have it only mildly. They'll have mild flu-like symptoms. Okay, 9 out of 10 have got underlying health problems. 4 out of 5 won't even know they've got it or only very mildly get it. Why did we lock down the entire population, cause massive delays in cancer treatment, which is going to kill people, cause huge mental health problems, suicide rate, crash the economy, which is going to affect people's jobs, and that means affecting their welfare, ultimately. Poverty and ill health go together. We caused all of that, when 9 out of 10 people had underlying health conditions. Now, to me, what should have happened, and I said this in the middle of March, so I'm not being clever in hindsight. I wrote it in the Express, very good column, by the way, every Wednesday. In March, I wrote it, that what we should have done was to have locked down everybody with an underlying health condition, told them to stay at home and shield, and told everybody else that it was their job to keep the economy and the volunteer effort going. That's what we should have done. I wanted to volunteer. I was over 70. Apparently, when you're over 70, you're declining and falling fit to rival ancient Rome.
Many of our audience is from the African Caribbean background, and majority are women. Would you have any tips for those who are in their journey to success, whether it be career?
Yes, I do. I have one very strong recommendation that I would say to every single woman who's watching this program. Forget you're a woman, in the sense that don't expect it to be an obstacle because you're a woman. Because if you do expect that, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I take that from my own experience in Parliament. I went into Parliament expecting to be treated exactly the same way as the men were. It was no issue for me that I was a woman. I was never really conscious of it. And, I became a senior minister. I was in the shadow cabinet, did all of that. About 6 months after what we call the Blair Babes, which was all the new women MP under Tony Blair got in, about 101 of them, they got in, and about 6 months afterwards, one of them came up to me in a corridor in the House of Commons, and she said to me, "Anne, isn't it horrible how the men are so rude to us?" I said, "Yes, and isn't it horrible how they're so rude to each other?" And she hadn't thought of that. She'd just been roughed up in the chamber. She assumed it was because she was a woman. In fact, it was because she was useless.
Thank you, Anne, for this exciting interview today. I'm sure our viewers love the conversation. Well, viewers, stay tuned for more fantastic interviews right here on Bring the Nation Back to God.